So Big Mouth is a pretty up show. Today we're gonna discuss some topics and some of the characters in Big Mouth and discuss why, even though I'm an adult, I feel like this show is something I would have really enjoyed and needed as a preteen. Big Mouth actually does bring up some serious topics. Some of the topics it discusses that I think are very interesting and I feel like kids and preteens should discuss more are things like consent, sexual desires, reputation, rumors, self-esteem, toxic masculinity, and even how you still are figuring out your sexuality through adulthood. And as Coach Steve says, do the song. So Big Mouth is a comedy cartoon on Netflix based on Nick Kroll and Andrew Goldberg's experiences as kids. The show actually has an amazing cast that has some of SNL's veterans like Maya Rudolph, Fred Armisen, sometimes Kristen Wiig. They have John Mulaney not only playing Andrew, but he is also a consultant on the show. And in most episodes, there is an appearance by comedy/horror legend Jordan Peele. The show is about how Nick and Andrew and other characters are going through puberty and the awkwardness of it all. And the show touches on actually contemporary topics of sex, relationships, and gender through the perspective of kids going through puberty. I feel like low-key this is something I needed growing up because when I was a preteen / beginning my teenage years, I would actually talk about subjects or things like that with my classmates or whoever, and I actually would be shamed. Like the boys would think like, oh, why is she thinking about all that stuff, she must be easy, and the girls would actually kind of feel like I was nasty or trying to get attention or whatever, when I wasn't. I was trying to figure it out just like everyone else. I would just be a little more vocal about it. I feel like a show like Big Mouth could actually help to normalize some things. I think if I had watched this show before, I would feel a little more confident in myself, or kind of be like, oh, okay, everyone goes through these things. So I'm gonna discuss some of the characters, but before we do that, obviously, spoiler alert. Before I actually discuss the topics, which I wanted to do first, but then I was like, what if there are people that haven't watched the show? I want to discuss some of the characters first. So I'm gonna discuss Nick and Andrew's friendship. So Nick and Andrew are the protagonists of the show. They're two 12, 13-year-old boys, and Nick, based on Nick Kroll, is a short, funny, clever kid. He's actually doing pretty good socially. Like, he's witty when he talks to other people, and compared to his counterparts, he's actually pretty good at treating women because his parents have instilled this sense of respect for women. Thanks to this, he's actually pretty confident to talk to Gina, which a lot of boys were actually not willing to do because they were objectifying her so much. However, watching the show and really nitpicking some points, you will realize that Nick is extremely insecure. And you can notice this in the first few moments of the show where he sees Andrew naked and he realizes that he might be inadequate compared to Andrew, who is developing at a really quick rate. But he also shows insecurity when Jesse dumps him and he tells the whole school that he was the one that dumped her. When he develops his cell phone addiction, he wants to do everything so his content will go viral because he needs the validation, which really affects his friendship with Andrew. Opposed to Nick, he is actually very dorky, very nerdy, he has very peculiar tastes, also a little more sensitive than Nick and a little more socially awkward. Like I mentioned, he is developing way quicker than Nick, and Nick is intimidated by this. Contrary to Nick, he actually has parents who aren't really there for him or know how to really educate him on certain subjects.
And then you kind of zhush it down.
Barbara, what are you doing with my last good banana? The next time you think you need to know something, Andrew, shut your face.
His father is pretty misogynistic, or at the very least, very antisocial. This leads him down a path of mistreating women, actually. In season 2, episode 7, he actually adopts like this him persona because he feels like it's better than being a creep, which is what he was called by a lot of people. When he realized that Missy still had feelings for him, he actually became a little entitled with her, and for a few moments actually became an incel. He goes to a meeting full of men who are extremely chauvinistic, but then he realizes it's a Nazi meeting. So there's that. I actually think that Andrew is honestly trying to be a good guy, but I feel like he lets his urges affect him way too much. He doesn't know how to control himself, which he should, but I think he's pretty conscious of that. Now, Nick and Andrew's friendship, I would say, is actually pretty toxic. Nick peer pressures Andrew a lot, especially because he thinks he is better than Andrew, or he is cooler than Andrew because he has such low self-esteem. He begs him to come to his party, he pressures him to go to New York City, he even forces him to drive, causing the accident in the garage. Andrew actually confesses to him that he feels like Nick has always treated him like less than because he's jealous and because his family isn't the best either. And I would say this is true. I think Nick really looks down on Andrew a lot. And I like that at the end of season 3, Nick actually apologizes to Andrew for this, but Andrew doesn't accept his apology. That's another thing about Nick. Nick feels very entitled to apologies. Like when he apologizes to Jesse, or when he apologizes to Gina, and now when he apologizes to Andrew. What's gonna happen in season 4? I don't know. I'm very excited to find out. Before I discuss the girls, I have to say that I hate that I kind of divided it like that, like, oh, the girls in the show. Reason being, I actually like how they discuss female sexuality in the show sometimes. It's not perfect, and I do have some slight issues with it, but I think the way they represent these girls going through puberty and feeling insecure and other personal issues that they face is pretty interesting. I like how at least the 2 main girl characters are explicitly feminist. I think it's pretty representative of the way girls are growing up nowadays. I feel like the show definitely passes the Bechdel test because of course a lot of the storylines are actually about them and not so much about Nick and Andrew. Sometimes Nick and Andrew are actually the secondary characters to the girl stories. So of course we got the main female character Jessie, who is actually based on one of Nick Kroll and Andrew Goldberg's friends. The second episode is actually based on a true story that they had with a friend where she gets her period at the Statue of Liberty. In the show, the Statue of Liberty actually tells Jessie how horrible it's going to be a woman, and it kind of gives us a preface of like what she's going to encounter.
Being a woman is misery. Nothing but pain and unwanted babies from terrible lovers, and worst of all, le cramp.
Jessie then meets the famous hormone monstress played by Maya Rudolph. At the beginning of season 1, she's actually slowly trying to learn about her own sexuality, like when she tries to buy the red bra and sees what kind of response she gets. But at the end of the season, her parents actually start to get divorced. And in season 2, that leads her down a dark path of shoplifting, running away, doing drugs. And even though throughout the show we learn that she's very liberal, at the end of season 2 when she starts feeling threatened by Gina, another girl who is funny and actually a really cool person, she actually slut shames her, which is completely against her values. She actually realizes this and tries to apologize, but it's already too late, and the show lets us know that she actually might be depressed. I actually love Jessie. I think Jessie is really funny. I think she represents a lot of issues that young girls might go through. She is, however, way more insecure than her counterpart Missy. Missy might actually be my favorite character. Missy is a young, dorky girl who grows up in a pretty leftist household. She is raised to actually hold her ground, even though she's a little shaky, she's a little awkward. It might be embarrassing to a lot of other people, but her parents are really good parents. When she and Andrew date, she's actually pretty upfront to him. She makes the first move in the closet with her mom. She's the one that breaks up with him when she realizes he's too much. I think this is important for kids to see because a lot of the times we might feel pressured or intimidated by boys that we date that feel like they are entitled to us. And with both Missy and Jessie, the show actually touches on a pretty interesting subject, which is female masturbation. The thing is that these girls are pretty young, so I think it's great that we get to touch on female masturbation on young girls because girls do have questions about that since they're young. I feel like when we mention female masturbation, people think about those bachelorette parties where a lot of sex toys come through and whatever, but these questions do happen since we're young, so I think it's pretty important to take off the stigma of if girls have questions about sexuality. In season 3, Missy instantly becomes one of my favorites because she questions, the dress code. During the protest, she wears whatever she actually wants, which is her overalls, and the girls actually fight her on this, but she ends up being the hero because instead of wearing the uniforms, she dressed whatever she wants, which is her overalls, and she has had enough and she calls everyone out on their bullshit, which I love. At the end of season 3, she actually claims autonomy because she discovers another part of herself. She gets her hormone monstrous Mona, and she starts feeling a little more secure of herself and in her sensuality. Another girl I'd actually like to discuss is Lola. I know we would usually think Devin, but screw Devin. I want to talk about Lola because she's a very interesting character. She is Devin, the popular girl's sidekick. She is very dependent on her, and even though she's shown to us as like comic relief and she does a lot of crazy stuff, I think Lola actually represents a lot of girls, and she actually goes through some things that a lot of us do go through. She forces Andrew to be her boyfriend, and they dry hump, but of course Andrew being a little piece of shite, he breaks up with her after, and she tells him something that I found a little disturbing.
What does it mean that even you you don't want to be with me.
Let's not.
I think that's sad because that means that she has very low self-esteem and she went out for probably the most loser of them all, and even he didn't want to date her, and I feel like she relies on that validation of other boys. To see that you shouldn't base your self-esteem on that is pretty important. Another important moment was when she was taken advantage by Lizer. He has a play, so she becomes his stage manager. While they discuss the play, he actually asks her to massage his feet. Andrew finds out, Lola tells Lizer that he found out, and Lizer is furious. This is very typical. When an abuser takes advantage of someone he shouldn't, like a 12-year-old girl, they will definitely make their victims feel guilty about other people knowing what they're doing because he knows that what he's doing is wrong. I like how even though this wasn't under a sexual context, all she did was rub his feet, this was still an abuse of power, which parallels his play, which discusses sexual assault in a very misogynistic way, might I add. It's crazy how abusers can actually make you feel guilty for what happened, and I'm very glad that Jesse could have a talk with her and tell her he actually betrayed you, he actually abused you, and Lola actually takes a stand, she calls him out, and he gets fired. And I think that's great because there is a small gag that's like Jesse always saying, "We believe women." She says it here, and here, and here in a funnier way, but then she also says it when Lola calls Lizer out, and I think it has greater power then. It's really cool to see how a joke actually had pretty serious power in the end. I think another running gag, which is she is smart and she knows who she is, actually could describe the girls in the show, at least what they're trying to do. I think we're all trying to be smart and know who we are. Just like everything else, I feel like the show is warming up to representation, especially LGBTQI+ issues, and at least the known characters that we have are very few, but I think the show is kind of warming up to show us more stories about that, which should be the case from the beginning. But Jay is a very crude boy. He's developing quicker than all of them. He does a lot of weird sexual things that intimidate everyone around him and also make them pity him, especially because he lives in a rough household. I think it's interesting to see how he finds out that he is bisexual. His dad is like toxic masculinity impersonated, and the show shows us his confusion, but it's never like a play on his masculinity. He keeps on being the same crude Jay. And I think the show actually does a pretty decent job at showing us how people typically invalidate bisexuality. We see Matthew, someone who is gay, do it, and the other boys actually find it very weird that he is bi. And this shows the double standard of men and bisexuality when Allie, played by Ali Wong, is shown to be pansexual and she is praised and all the guys desire her or whatever. I think it touches on a really interesting topic there. We also got Matthew, which is the only openly gay boy at Bridgeton. I feel like the show is slowly trying to correct that they made him like the catty gay character at the beginning. He is the typical GBF to Jesse, and not to enforce that GBF-ness, but I actually do love his friendship to Jesse. I think it's a very wholesome friendship and it reminds me of a lot of my friendships. He then meets a boy at the beginning of season 3 and they begin dating, and it is actually a really sweet story. I'm over here hoping that it doesn't delve into like the tragic LGBTQ+ character trope, because I think he comes out to his father in season 4, so let's see how that plays out. All in all, I really like these characters. Let's see how they play into some of the more interesting topics in the show. When Jesse buys a red bra to feel sexually voluptuous or desired from the boys, which she actually liked, but then she also didn't like how the girls thought she was trashy, or how Jay and even Mr. Lizer was looking at her. That one time where Andrew was actually conflicted about masturbating to Missy because he felt like he was cheating on her. I feel like that's a very interesting subject that maybe happens to a lot of boys. They feel like they're disrespecting the object of their sexual desire. I think that's a very important subject to touch on. When talking about consent, there is this moment where Leah, Nick's older sister, and the boy named Daniel are making out, and he tries to force her to do something that she's not comfortable with. I think Leah responded so perfectly to this. I think that's exactly how we should respond to people who want to force us to do something we're not comfortable with. And then Missy confuses this when she is forward with Andrew and pushes her mons pubis onto him, and she thinks it's the same thing, which of course it wasn't, but they're all just figuring it out, you know, so they're all confused.
I'm a Mons pusher!
Mons pusher?
Mons?
Mons?
One of my favorite episodes is actually Girls Are Horny Too. They actually do discuss female desire and the respect for women in this episode, because even though Jesse wants to go out there and feel desired, Jay actually takes this as a signal to be sexual with her. And I like how Jesse was actually very angry at him and took control of the situation. I think the topic of dress codes is actually pretty important because, of course, there's a major double standard, which they teach us with Lizer being like, all the girls have to dress modestly now, and the boys don't have to do anything. They will never have any self-control. And I think the subject of the shame wizard is actually very important here, because a lot of the things that kids feel when talking about sex is shame. They feel ashamed that they have certain desires. They feel ashamed that they might not be straight. The thing is that the shame wizard's purpose is actually to make everyone feel bad about themselves. This is shown in season 2, episode 8, where the shame monster completely takes over when Jesse actually slut shames Gina. I think it's interesting to see how the show deals with like rumors and reputation and how people are seen sexually. Look at the difference of how Nick was treated when he told everyone that he touched Gina's boob, and how Gina was treated. I'm glad that this showed the double standard that there is when it comes to sexuality, and I think Lola's quote really summarizes how we should feel when it comes to our desires and not giving a shit about what other people think about our desires. One of my all-time favorite episodes is season 2, episode 2, where Andrew says this: because growing up, oh my god, I felt so bad about my body. And it was specifically because boys were so often shaming other women for not having big enough boobs or a big enough butt or this and that. And girls that wouldn't have that, me, would feel shitty about myself. This is one of the biggest episodes where I'm like, I needed this as a kid. I still need this as an adult. The body positivity song, it actually did went viral. I remember it going viral. And I really loved how Missy had a mother who taught at least Jesse and Missy to love themselves no matter what boys think. Another episode that touches on self-esteem is the ranking episode, where everyone kind of ranks like who's the hottest boy, who's the hottest girl. I think it's a pretty good lesson on like, don't let yourself be defined by if you're liked or not by another boy or girl. A major topic discussed pretty well in my opinion by the show is toxic masculinity, and there's one episode completely dedicated to it, which is Guy Town. Nick tries to look to his dad for like advice on how to get a girl, and when he doesn't get the advice that he thinks, which is like, you know, be forward, be aggressive or whatever, he thinks of his dad as less than a man, when even Andrew's dad, who's according to Andrew, he actually tells him that he's a man that he should look up to and should follow his advice, and ends up giving him the best advice actually, which is to go take Gina out on a date, do something you like. That it's simple, it's as simple as that. I think the show actually does make a good point of showing us a variety of types of men, which is every show ever, but it does show it from the point of view of like toxic masculinity and how to be a guy and how to not be a guy, which is pretty well resumed in Matthew's quote. The show also makes a point to show us some wolf in sheep's clothing, which are Mr. Lizer and Daniel. Mr. Lizer is a fake feminist who is always using like feminist lingo.
We all agree there's a lot of toxic masculinity at this school,
but actually does some pretty shitty things, especially shown with his play. And Daniel is out there just being like, who run the world? Girls. But is actually just pressuring women to do what he wants sexually, and if they don't comply, he makes rumors about them. Now, a topic that I can actually relate to now at 24 years old is how you keep on discovering your sexuality into adulthood. The show actually gives us a few examples through the parents of the kids. For example, Nick's parents are actually very healthy. They show their kids about respect, about consent, how to be comfortable in your own sexuality, and they maintain a pretty healthy relationship to show for it. Andrew's parents are the complete opposite. They're very closed off. If sex is even brought up, they are disgusted or repulsed by it.
Shut your face!
It's not something they like to discuss, which happens to a lot of parents, and that ends up affecting their kids, because look at Andrew. Since he never had an honest discussion with his parents about sex, he doesn't know how to treat girls. Marty and Barbara's relationship is just that of a typical baby boomer / Gen Z relationship. I also liked how they had a character for menopause for Barbara. Jesse's mom Shannon is actually figuring out her sexual orientation. She cheats on Jesse's father with a woman, and of course this affects Jesse, this affects her relationship with Greg, of course. But Matthew, as an LGBTQ+ character, actually tells Jesse something pretty interesting. That can happen to anyone at any age, and I think it's pretty interesting that we get to see it. Coach Steve makes me confused. I don't know if he's there simply for comedic effect, or if he's there representing what it's like to be a baby into an adult, or like I don't get it, but he's funny. I actually just want to make a quick point about Duke. I think we all love the episode where we go back in time and we see Duke as a preteen just discovering life as well as the kids are, and I thought it was very interesting to see how puberty was dealt with in another era. This episode is set literally 100 years before the episode, and I think it's very interesting to see how kids managed during that time. A lot of people have said that the world is very confusing, which, bro, it's a cartoon. Just get over the logistics. Who fucking cares? My main question though is, are the hormone monsters representing their hormones, or are they a part of them? Is Maury what Andrew is really thinking, or is it what his hormones are thinking? The show has actually garnered a lot of criticism because of showing like really sexual moments with the kids, and like it's actually sometimes pretty explicit as well, and I would actually have to agree with that. I think they can take an example from their own scene with the Mr. Lizer and Lola situation, where you don't have to really show a situation to tell a story. I don't think we have to see the kids' genitals ever. I can hear Kristen Wiig. I don't have to see Jesse's vagina. You know what I mean? Some other controversies that I can include are how they handled defining pansexuality. I think they did a bad job with that. I think they should have definitely changed that, and Andrew Goldberg actually agreed with this and actually said like, yeah, no, you're right. We apologized and said we should have done better. I can't really speak much on this, but I think it's pretty interesting that they actually changed Missy's voice actress from the iconic Jenny Slate to Ayo Edebiri, who will actually play Missy now. I find it pretty interesting that they did that without much controversy. I don't really remember an outrage where people were like, oh, like a Jewish white woman shouldn't voice a half black, half Jewish girl. But I am glad that they've changed it to an actual black woman who will be playing Missy, especially because Missy's father's side of the family will actually be discussed in season 4. I feel like Maury, the hormone monster, also says a lot of controversial things that I feel like if they were all on the timeline, they'd get him canceled. All in all, yeah, I am a fan of the show. I know a lot of people hate it. I don't know if it's unironic or not. I don't care. This also isn't a defense of the show. I'm just saying that it does discuss a lot of subjects that I feel like other shows don't discuss very often. I actually love the cultural references. I think the cast is great. I'm a big fan of John Mulaney. I feel like the show does follow the liberal agenda, and they actually even pointed this out in the SNL-esque episode where they had like 5 skits, which was, I think, very important. They discussed Planned Parenthood services, birth control, family planning, STDs, cancer screenings, and abortion. All in all, I am a big fan of the show, and I can't wait to see why Andrew's dad Marty has an eye patch at the end of the season. I guess we'll find out this week. Thank you so much for watching. I don't often do TV and movie analysis. I had so much fun doing this because I watch Big Mouth all the time, and discussing the characters and the topics was actually really interesting. Let me know if you actually like Big Mouth. If you don't, what you're excited to see in this season. And if you watch me often, let me know if you liked my analysis and if I should analyze other shows or movies and stuff. Again, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and also subscribe. That would help my channel a lot, even though I am just thankful you're here. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be seeing y'all.